My name is Andrew Brown, and this series of interviews with distinguished Scottish women artists is called Scottish Women Can Paint. Came about as a riposte to the statement made by the German artist George Baselitz, who said, "Women can't paint," when asked why women were so underrepresented in art museums and exhibitions. These interviews with and about several prominent Scottish women artists sets out to disprove that belief and try to understand how, against incredible odds, a dedicated group of Scottish women artists have managed to create some of the best paintings produced in Scotland and outside it during the last half of the 20th century. Today, I'm talking to my old friend and neighbour, Sheila Mullen. When I say neighbour, we live an hour apart, but we both live in the middle of nowhere. It's been my privilege to know her and exhibit her paintings for more than 40 years. Good afternoon, Sheila.
Good afternoon.
We're going to start with just a series of questions which we're asking everyone, but before that I wanted to ask you if you, within earshot, heard George Baselitz say Scottish women can't paint.
No, I didn't.
But if you did hear that, what would you say?
I would say rubbish. I didn't swear.
Right, let's get down to the serious questions. Where and when were you born?
I was born on the 24th of January 1942, somewhere in a private nursing home near Glasgow. But my mother always had chloroform and had to go into a private nursing home to receive this because she didn't want to go to a local hospital.
You told me that, of course, you were born just during the war, so you were evacuated, were you not, to the country?
No, my father was discharged from the army because he had what he called bleeding. He was covered in blood and covered in bandages, and people used to be terribly kind to him and help him on trains and buses, and he felt a real guilt. But we had a family farm in Fife, and he went there to work on the farm. And where I learned to talk and to walk and everything else. And
that's where you learned to speak in Lowlands.
Yes.
And also the other thing I remember you told me about, I mean, you're a great painter of animals. And of course, on this farm, you were close to animals all the time. Mm-hmm. In fact, I seem to remember you said something about as a 2-year-old being put on the back of a shire horse.
Yes, and it ran away. Somebody left the back door open and it saw the fields and it just ran away. I can still remember the feeling of its mane, the gritty, oily mane of this shire horse, and it didn't fall off. I managed to, it just thundered away, and then it found the grass and bent down, and I still stayed on. So.
Was there anyone in your family who encouraged you to do art?
Nobody. No, nobody encouraged me to do art. But I remember once my mother saying that her father had been an artist, but I don't know whether that's true or not. Not that I'm aware of. And
then after the war, you moved back to Glasgow. Mm-hmm. What age were you when you moved to Glasgow?
Difficult to know because everybody's dead now. I suspect at the end of the war. Unless they would go on working on the farm for a while longer. That was the only time my father was really happy, when he was working on the farm.
And you went to school in Glasgow? Mm-hmm. And did anyone encourage you at school?
No. Actually, painting, in where I was brought up, was a kind of dirty word. Nobody painted. That was why didn't you do a proper job and not paint?
Yeah, you still, yourself, you wanted to paint, didn't you?
Well, I had to keep, at the beginning, I didn't paint because I didn't have access to paints, but I used to make things all the time. In the summer, I used to gather petals off the plants and sew them into little shapes, and shells. We stayed in Largo, and I gathered shells and made things with shells. And then when my father went back to work with his father, he had a desk, he had a study, he had a place, and I had pens, and I used to draw on all these writing paper had all my drawings on it.
But you did then go, after school, you went to some art classes, didn't you?
Well, and my father had a lot of customers. He was in the West End, and he knew Jean Irwin, and he knew a lot of people. In fact, he knew, who was that man that he wanted me, to me he was very eclectic, Crosby. Crosby wanted me to go to art school when I was a tiny wee girl, and I said, I don't want his help.
Well, so you're not unencouraged to do art.
But other people, not my family.
Yeah. So, and Jean Irwin she ran a very influential person.
And I went every Saturday. My father had 3 shops in Gibson Street, and my grandpa had them, and then my father. And he used to take us in the car, and I used to walk all the way from Gibson Street to the art galleries, and I thought nothing of it, and painted it. But she never, she didn't really annoy me. She just let us get on with it.
Well, this was Kelvin Grove Art Gallery, so you were going as a child to Kelvin Grove Art Gallery and studying art with the famous Jean Irwin.
Yes.
So you weren't exactly without encouragement.
No, but not in my family. Nobody in the family, because it was a kind of bad thing.
So did Jean Irwin encourage you to go to art school?
No, not that I'm aware of. In fact, Jean Irwin wanted to adopt me. She used to take me to see Aida. She took me various times to the theatre, and I think she thought having a little girl would be an added thing. Anyway.
So when did you then devise the idea of going to art school?
I just never thought there was ever any possibility of doing other. That was all I was going to do.
Without any encouragement?
Without any encouragement, no.
Well, that brings me to one of the other questions I'm asking everyone, which is, Marina Abramovich once said, you cannot become an artist, you have to be born one. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yes. I certainly was.
So from what age did you know you were going to be an artist?
About 2, I think.
So even though you weren't painting the shells, the flowers,
yes.
Making things?
Yes, I was making things.
And you made dolls and toys?
I never was not working, making something.
So then you got to art college. Mm-hmm. What year did you go to art college?
1962.
62. And how did you find your time there?
Absolute waste of time. Nobody spoke to me. I was so disappointed in the quality of the students, because they were just not necessarily the best students at school. They were just pretty ordinary. I was very disappointed. What we call the big weaver was Miss Hamilton, and she did weaving, and I liked that, and I was a good weaver, and I got a special big loom because I was so good at it. And she did wood carving, and I was very good at that. So I liked Elizabeth Hamilton. Yeah,
I was going to ask you that question. I mean, were there any influential female teachers at the college, and this was the only one?
That's the only one. But I mean, in a way, what was a good thing is it was a practicality of carving, because other things, I had somehow imagined, foolishly, that there would be some special tricks that somebody would tell me how to mix colours, how to do this, how to do that, but they didn't do anything like that.
Do you think they treated girls any differently?
Oh yes, yes, very much so, because Sam, my husband, he was very lazy, and I used to do all his work that we had to do at home. And he would pass and I would fail, and it was the same person had done work, and I had done it for me and I'd done it for him, and he would pass and I would fail, and that was
And you had done the work for both of them?
Yes.
So there was a bias against
very
women.
much so, yes.
I mean, in fact, how many female art teachers were there, would you say?
There was no painters. There was Olivia Roberts, who did design, and Elizabeth Hamilton, who did wood carving. And
so no one in the painting school at all? No. Because Mary Armour did teach there.
Yes, but I never had her. Yeah. And I think she'd retired by the time I came along.
So when did you met your husband at art school? So did you marry when you were at art school?
Yes.
So, And I think you have said to me, in one way, it was a way of getting independence from your
Yes, it
family.
was the only way I could get away from my mother. Because in those days, you couldn't go and live with somebody. But he didn't want to marry me. I had to have a lot of pressure to put on him. Anyway.
And did you become pregnant when you were still in hospital?
No. It was only after MS, and they told me there was nothing they could do, that if I wanted to have a child, I should have it now, because I wouldn't be able to manage later on. And I did. I got pregnant almost immediately. I was 22 and had a baby and thought, I'm great, I'm completely cured. And I had another 2 quickly within the oldest, when John was 4, Emily was 2, and the new baby. So that was the sort of time span.
Well, let's just go back a bit, because we haven't said, and I noticed that while you were at our college, you were diagnosed with MS. Mm-hmm. And this was very serious, wasn't it?
Yes, but I wasn't so ill at that point. But it was only after my 3rd baby that I became really ill. And I was, I couldn't walk. I had to hold on to the wall. When I could get out of the bed, I would hold on to the wall. But luckily I had vinyl with sort of a pattern, and I could follow the pattern, so I didn't want to walk like a person, a cripple with funny walking. I just wanted to walk straight. And I could hold on to the pram, which kept me upright.
So, I mean, how were you actually managing to look after the children? I mean, was your husband helping you look after them?
No, I had to do everything because I knew. I mean, it started off for a couple of days. My mother and father took them, I think, for a week. The 2 oldest, I'd left with the baby. And then I couldn't stand it and they couldn't stand it, so we brought them home.
And this is something that there is a quote, another quote which I've asked people, from Maggie Hambling, where she says if she had a painting crying in one room and a baby crying in the other, she would go to the baby.
Oh yes, you had to. That was, and I loved having babies, and I loved being pregnant, and I loved giving birth, and I loved children. That was, to me, it was a very creative thing to do.
I remember you saying that to me. You saw not as stopping your creativity by having children, it was continuing your creativity.
Yes, that's right.
So in a way, everything you do is part of a creative process.
Yep.
So when you left art school, had these babies, how did you manage to continue doing your own art?
Well, I made everything for the children. There used to be great jumble sales, because they had just started and it was great. I could buy things and cut them up and I made all their clothes, I made all their toys, and they just had to put orders in. And Mum, could you make me a spinning wheel? And I would make a spinning wheel. Could you make me a pig? And I would make a pig, and all things that they couldn't get. And then the boys, I used to make, in those days you couldn't buy football strips, but I used to buy T-shirts, second-hand T-shirts, and dye them and sew on the numbers and all these sort of things. And they thought it was great. They all say I had a wonderful childhood.
And you did move out of Glasgow, didn't you?
Yes. In 1972, I didn't want the children brought up in the city. Although we stayed in the West End and it was, I suppose, quite nice, but we went, my husband's family had property in Sandbank. They'd been left the property and we moved down there. And it was great because once the Americans went away, they left pretty good stuff, so I just had to think of what I needed, and I'd go to a jumble sale and I would get it, so it was just great.
And how long were you there on the West Coast?
5 years.
And did you paint when you were there?
Yes.
So you were painting again?
Yes. Well, you see, the trouble was I could only do it when it was difficult for me to get time, because Sam wasn't keen. I had seen, my father was a very clever man, and he was made to leave school when he was 12. And I thought, I'm not going to be guilty of denying a man his inheritance in a way, and I thought I'll support Sam. And in every house we were in, he got the best room in the house for his studio, which he didn't use. And anyway, I had to always look after the children. And
you had a small room at the back?
Yeah.
But you did continue painting?
Yes, I did.
And what sort of things did you paint?
Landscapes. In fact, there's one here, and John's got one, and just places that I loved, because I always had to love something to paint it. I couldn't paint something that wasn't important to me. We'll talk about when you moved to Dumfriesshire later, and the
big series of landscapes you did here when I first met you. And it was there that someone described you as the Airdrie of the forests, because you really loved them so much.
Yes. I mean, I loved Scotland, and I had to paint, and that was one of the reasons that I painted. Everything I've painted, certainly since 2001, has been Scottish, because I loved Scotland. I loved everything about it. I mean, I'm afraid I loved everything. No, it's true.
What? And then you moved here
Yes.
to Dumfries and Galloway.
In
Why did you come here?
Because in Sandbank, it became impossible. The children had to stay off school every Monday because right next door to us was the base, and they had music till 1 or 2 in the morning, and the children.
The American Army.
Yes. And they had to stay at home to sleep because they didn't get sleeping during the weekend.
So why did you choose Dumfries and Galloway? You had no connection.
Pure chance. I looked up the Glasgow Herald and I saw this advert, and I thought, I think that's great. And Sam came down. We didn't have a car, and he got the train down, and then to Lockerbie, and got a lift up to see the house that we had originally, the doctor's house, and
At Johnson Bridge.
Johnson Bridge. Yes.
And I remember that because that's when I first met you, when in about 1979, do you think?
Well, we moved here in 77.
Yeah. It was soon afterwards that I met you. And that was because the minister's daughter
Yes.
knew me in Edinburgh. She had been at University of Edinburgh.
And Katie
Hazel.
yeah.
A lovely one.
And she said, because I was painting, and I kept my paintings always secret. All my life I kept my paintings secret because it was a kind of dirty thing to be a painter. A bit like talking Scots, it was a dirty thing. And she said, but this is wonderful, you should go to Edinburgh. And I thought, I'll start at the top. And I chose the 369. And I was right.
But when was that your first exhibition, or had you had an exhibition?
No, I had an
before
exhibition
that?
because my elder daughter, she had a boyfriend who was at Carlisle Art School, and he equally, that's what encouraged me to go to Edinburgh, and he said, these are great, and he organised an exhibition for me in Carlisle Art School, and I became friendly with John Rees, who was the principal of art at the college.
And basically you haven't stopped painting since then, have you?
I didn't really stop before that, but certainly no.
Yes, I mean, we're saying now we're in this barn which has literally, certainly dozens of your paintings, and in your studio, which we're going to visit later, there are hundreds stacked up, and these are
And
ones
there's
you
about
haven't
the
seen.
place. There's quite a lot in the house, and every time now when people enjoy paintings, they say, well, take it with you, you don't have to buy it. Take it with you and live with it and see how you feel about it.
I mean, I vividly remember coming to see you at Johnson Bridge in that first house, but my great memory was of your pet sheep, because you had a lamb which thought it was a dog. You brought it up and just came and sat down in front of the fire like a dog. And you've always actually done a little bit of freeholding and farming.
Yes, in fact, I used to work on the farm down the road. I used to do a lot of work, haymaking, clipping, working with cattle, whenever it was needed. And
because in a way you were really, because though Sam was a painter and did a bit of teaching, you were the main breadwinner for the family.
And I was the man of the family.
So you did everything. And in fact, you were a house painter at one time.
That was my job. I was the estate house painter.
So painted all the windows and
not just that. They had never heard of undercoat, and I introduced them to undercoating, and I used to cement work, and then built all of this. When I moved in here, I put every door and every window cemented. So I'm another man.
Yes, and that's it, because from that one house, reasonable sized house, but you moved here, which is an entire farm complex of several barns and the bothy, which is studio and the house. So you have a huge area.
And a field.
And a field. And you did keep sheep until last
Oh
year.
yes, I've kept cows, I've kept pigs, I've kept goats, I've kept geese, I've kept hens and sheep.
It's amazing you had any time for painting.
I know, but I've never stopped.
I know you stopped there. Can I ask you then just about your painting? When I first met you, and we had our exhibitions at 369 Gallery in the late 70s, early 80s, it was landscape painting.
With no people in.
Yes. Though I do remember a story that you once told me, wonderful, that it was always plein air, wasn't it? Outdoors.
Yes, that was the only way I could get peace.
And you went on your bicycle carrying big canvases.
I made a great thing on a bicycle. I got a second-hand bike, and I made the parcel rest. I put a piece of wood on so it would take big canvases, and I had everything, and an elastic to tie it onto the footrests. But in those days, the road was quiet, so you could do it.
That's a bit like Airdley tied her things onto the beach. You had her little carty. You went off to it. And I love this story you told me, that because you were sitting there quietly painting, nature came to you, that you said that you were sitting there painting and suddenly a mother hedgehog with her family
I know,
just
I've never, and it was lovely. I've never seen such a thing before.
Tell me about it.
Well, I used to always, before 2001, I used to often paint in the Annan, but then I discovered the Kinnell, which is the next river up, and it was wonderful, and it was full of magic, and that's where I got your stone, and it was just an amazing place. And always when I used to paint landscapes, they would seem to me to be magic. Although there weren't people in them, I could feel the people that had been there, and I always knew where to go. I always walked and carried all my gear, and I would find a place, and I think there's been people here before, and so I would sit down and paint, and that's how I found a place to paint. And I didn't even know it was one of these magic things. I covered it with newspaper and plastic and then brought it home, and that was the first time I'd really seen the painting, because I didn't know who had painted them. Sometimes I thought, God, that's jolly good. It wasn't painted by me. Who painted it? You know.
So intuition.
Yes.
Yeah, well, let's also talk about that then. How do you start a painting? Is it just, well, you find the place and then... Well,
if I'm doing a landscape, but now, because I've been painting for hundreds of years, it's hard to find things to paint. And I never wanted to do the same painting twice, and I didn't ever want to have one of these boring things with, the same size of canvases and the same colours. So they're all different. And what was your question?
Yeah, well, about how you paint. I think... Yeah. I think really what I'm talking about is not so much the landscape, how you change from landscape to figuration.
Well, I'll tell you what it is.
A crucial change in your work.
I realise I'm painting ideas now. And often, latterly, it's been poems, because they're full of ideas, often. Not all poems are. I mean, it doesn't mean I don't like the poem, but sometimes they don't give me a painting. But other poems I read, and I get a painting just...
Before you started doing poems, didn't you do the border ballads
Yes,
first?
that was the thing. Well, when I fell off the roof in 2001, it was the year of the foot and mouth, and a lot of bad things happened. But when the foot and mouth came, we weren't allowed to go wandering about the country. So although I couldn't see properly for 2 months, I had to keep painting. So I thought, what am I going to do? But I wasn't stuck. And I suddenly thought, this is the borders. And there must be wee skeletons, babies that have been destroyed by their mothers, just under stones. And we've got a skeleton in the farm, and I just thought there must be hundreds of skeletons from these times. And then, I became quite an expert. Although I had known the ballads, I'll show you an art school painting I've got of Tall Corbies that I did in the art school. So I was quite into the ballads then, but then I became quite an expert about the ballads.
Yeah, I mean, they're all pretty vicious and dramatic and sad. They never end well. They're not happy stories.
No, but they're
a skeleton at the end of every one.
Yes, but they're always very tender. There's always a wee bit of love in them. Because although these were everybody, it wasn't just the reavers that were horrible. Everybody was horrible in those days. But they still had this magic about them, that they had love in them too. And I've tried to paint love mostly.
Well, I love that one you did of is it called The Speaking Heart?
That's not a ballad.
Well, that's a poem, is it?
That is Speaking Heart. I'm trying to think. I've got so many paintings.
It's the one where the mother asks the son...
That's Edward. Edward, why did your brancy drop with blood, Edward? And he's looking ashamed, and he's holding his dagger up, and he doesn't admit to her that he's killed her father, because he says, I've killed my pony. And she says, you've got plenty of ponies. And his blood was nearly clear. And they said, well, I've killed my dog. And she says, it was an old dog. And then he says, I've killed my father. And then she starts at him and she says, what in penance are you dree for that, Edward? And he says, I'll sit in that boat and I'll sail away. And she says, what about your wife and children? And he said, the world is big enough for them to beg. And then he turns to her and he says, an ill death may ye die. And that's, to me, that's a great curse. I've cursed people with my...
Go again.
An ill death may ye die.
And she was the one who told him to kill his father.
She annoyed him to kill his father. And he'd finally done it.
They're all, maybe we can look at that one later. I love that painting. I love all your border balance painting. But you were mentioning the fall from the roof, but that is true. When you were doing your house painting, at one point, you actually fell off the roof and concussed yourself.
Yes, and completely smashed my right arm. And I've still got the bump in my thigh. And I suspect that might be to do with how I've got the arthritis in my knee, because that whole leg was damaged.
And that caused you to rethink things, didn't it?
And they actually said I had a stroke. And I knew I hadn't had a stroke because I could remember everything that happened before and after, although I was unconscious after it for a while. But, and they kept saying, what is your weak side? And I just said, I don't have a weak side. You must have a weak side, you've had a stroke. And I said, I haven't had a stroke. And eventually they got a doctor to examine me. He said, you've not had a stroke. And I thought, no, I know I haven't had a stroke. And I said to the doctor, he said, well, why would you fall off the roof if you hadn't had a stroke? I said, listen, people have accidents, they don't have strokes. But anyway.
Yes, were the tiles wet with rain or something?
Yes, the rain came on and it was up the slates and slipped down.
Well, anyway, out of that came your change of your work.
Yes, and I've never stopped since then.
And the other change in the work was, because those border ballads were the first ones I knew when you went into figuration.
Yes.
You then moved into contemporary poetry.
No, but much later, because after the border ballads, I went back the way and I went to Celtic themes. And I read up about, I'm a great reader, I read up a lot about Celtic religion and how people were and gods. And then I went on, louped forward, and I went to long dead poets like Scott, Hogg, Burns, Henryson, all of these people. And then, sort of not quite so long dead,
Hamish Henderson.
And Sorna MacLean. And I've got modern Scottish poets and they're all dead. But anyway, I've got Sorna MacLean. And of course, I've done a few exhibitions and talks about things, so I've done a lot of paintings of a lot of poems. But that's Dream Angus that you can see just in the...
We'll look at that. I love that painting. That's one of your Celtic ones.
Yes, but I'll tell you what the whole story is. Yeah. I used to be a great singer. I used to love singing. And that was my out, just singing. And I don't know where I knew the songs from. And I used to sing Dream Angus. And Dream Angus' song, although I didn't know it then, is almost unique because it's a Scots translation of Gaelic. Now, usually Gaelic is translated into English, but this is Scots. So when my siblings were growing up and were crying themselves to sleep, I used to sing them, and this was a lullaby. I would sing them, Dream Angus. And I thought it was my song, and I didn't know it was anybody else's song. It was just my song. And one time I was over visiting my daughter in Italy, in Stansted, and I found this book called Dream Angus. And it was like finding your family photographs in somebody else's house, and you think, where did this come from? And I read it, and I realised it wasn't my God at all, Dream Angus. And I found out Angus was actually the god of love and dreams. And I painted him. I've done a series of paintings of him. And his mother was Boan, who was a water sprite, and his father was the Dagda, who was the great god. And always above his head would be a circle of birds.
Which we've got here at the moment.
Yes. So I thought, I love Angus, but I couldn't believe. I thought, what are they doing with my song?
So is it because you paint literally hundreds of paintings a year? You're painting sometimes 2 paintings together or more. So you're painting every week.
Every day, more or less.
Kind of ran out of those and then went into more modern poetry.
Yes, and latterly, very latterly, I thought I've become, and it was really nice. I was invited to Palnaki by Stuart Patterson, and Jerry Donnelly, and it was lovely because they were young and they were enthusiastic.
Was it the art centre there, you mean?
No, this was at Lucy's.
Lucy, yes, what's an art gallery art centre?
At the old Mill Gallery.
Yes.
And we discussed, and it was funny, they were talking about me in front of me, and they were actually saying nice things. I always expect people, if they're talking about you, to begin, look at her. But anyway, they were being nice about me. So I just suddenly thought, this is lovely. I wouldn't like to be part of a group that had coffee and cakes and that, but I just would like to know people. But anyhow, we decided among us that we would have an exhibition, and I thought, why don't I do local poets? And because I've done quite a lot of the poems, I have a wee book that I got from somebody, and it's Chuckies for the Cairn, and it's all local poets, Dumfries poets, and they're all very good. And that's where Ina comes from. And
that's a beautiful painting. We'll look at that as well. So, going back to things you were saying about this kind of, you're in a very isolated farmhouse in the middle of nowhere.
Yes.
It was your choice to be
yes,
here.
I've always been isolated.
Yes. So, do you feel you need to paint for anyone? Do you paint for a public? Who do you paint for?
I only paint for myself. And that was a great thing in Sandbank. I suddenly thought, it doesn't matter if nobody else likes them. They're mine. I'm painting them. They're for me, only for me. And if nobody else likes them, well, doesn't matter.
Though you're perfectly happy if someone does like them.
Yes, that's lovely when somebody does, but I don't paint them so that somebody will like them.
I mean, that was the other question I'm going to ask about influences in a way, because your work is so individual and it's to do, as you say, with ideas. Even with landscape, it was ideas.
Yes.
Were there any artists who influenced you?
No. The only person that I remember influencing me was a sculpture that I saw in Glasgow art galleries many, many years ago, and it was like a block of stone, and struggling to come out of the block was a head. And I thought, that's how I want my paintings to do. Come out of the canvas, struggle out of the canvas. I'll help them, bring them out. But that was the thing.
Well, you certainly do, and you paint very thick impasto, which gives them real vitality and wonderful colours. I mean, you're a great colourist. So, going on with that, how would you then define success as an artist?
Just to keep on painting the way I want to paint. How do I have success? Because I mean, latterly, for the last 10 years or so, Sam's refused to go anywhere anyhow, so I've been entirely isolated here. And at least I have no noisy neighbours. I can do what I like. My garden is heavenly, and I've got all my animals and my friends, and it's all fine.
I mean, so how have you been able to survive to do it? I mean, to do this painting?
Well, if I just feel a bit low, I just go and paint.
No, I'm just wondering how financially you've survived.
Well, it's difficult, but I've been very lucky because you got me some paint, and Lucy sent me a set of oil paint just out of the blue. I didn't ask for them because I would never ask for anything. But I mean,
I couldn't have you running out of paint.
Well, and I've made these canvases. I made these because.
And of course, you make all your frames
yes,
too. So it's all. Well, I mean, how do you foresee your future? Is that a difficult question?
I try not to think of the future because for a while I thought, this is me, I'm just dying. This is it, I'm just going to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle, and I'm going to somebody's going to find me. And it might be a week later after I'm dead because nobody will find me. And I'll be dead, I'll have been dead for a long time. But I don't think that now. I would have found you anyway. Yes, I just want to go on and just keep painting.
Did you ever consider yourself to be part of the Scottish art world?
No. I don't ever consider myself to be part of anything. And I would love in a way, because that was lovely when I was meeting these people at Pulnaki, and they're all poets, and it was lovely just to be included in this, because I've never been included in anything.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm wondering now. Actually, now that you've had that book of your paintings and poems printed, that's a beautiful book, which has got that Witcher Fife, marvellous Witcher Fife painting in it. So, in a way, you're being taken up more by poets and writers.
Yes. Because it's ideas, that they're looking for ideas too, I think.
I think that's true, and because, for instance, you could never have left Scotland, could you?
No. No, I love Scotland too much. I love here. In fact, I was just saying to my son, if I won the lottery, which I don't do, but I don't think I'd leave here. I'd just get taxis to take me everywhere. That would be all I would.
So basically, Scotland had to find you in a way, which it's beginning to do
Yes, and all women are suddenly popular.
Yes.
Because I never was popular before. I mean, nobody got a chance whether I was popular or not, but at school, I was never in part of anything.
And we've had a few, there was that exhibition of your, because you've also done religious paintings as well, biblical paintings, which we had in St Mary's Cathedral in Edinburgh, and your paintings to Hamish Henderson's poems, which were at Summer Hall in Edinburgh. So people are beginning to see them again now. And this proposal for the Palnackie Gallery for you to do contemporary poets. And you have always exhibited.
Oh yes, but always just locally. Well, almost always.
Have you exhibited in London? Did you?
Yes, I have done. I have exhibited twice. Through the 369, there was a woman kind of approached me. She took some paintings, but what I've discovered that most of the people who like my paintings don't choose the best paintings. I don't know what they're looking for, but they don't choose the best paintings.
They perhaps choose the easier ones.
Yes, I think so.
Because your best ones are the ones that are sometimes...
Well, I have to tell people...
Not so superficially...
You have to learn the language to enjoy my paintings. And they learn the language and they enjoy my paintings. And they say, oh, I can see it now. Because people used to accuse me of painting abstract, but I've never painted abstract, I just painted.
Do you think that there's a particular female artistic sensibility, or does it not matter? It's just to do with your experience and abilities and opportunities. And it doesn't matter whether you're male or female.
No, it doesn't matter. And in fact, I don't count myself as male or female. I just count myself as a person. I always have done. And I find the same, I dealt with the children just as people, not boys or girls.
I hope you don't mind me saying this. I remember in a quiet conversation between us, you said as a child you actually almost saw yourself as a nature goddess.
Yes, not even as a child, as quite an adult. At Sandbank, I thought I was a nature goddess. I just thought I could see myself.
And that's why the family of hedgehogs stopped and looked up at you.
Because I've always been very close to animals. And actually helped animals, healed animals even, just things, and it healed myself.
Yes, well that is another thing that is interesting. What you said, that when you had the bad bout of MS, which completely put you on your back for several months, and you knew you had to get out of it, you said to me, you just imagined your way out of it.
Yes, because I imagined my brain. And I could see the paths that I was used to taking and I couldn't use now. And so I had to make new paths in my brain, and I did. And suddenly slowly I was better.
Yes, you said you imagined your brain like the world, covered with paths. And, I think it's a lovely neurological description.
Because they said there was nothing they could do, and I thought, well, in that case, I'll just get better myself.
And that was how many years ago?
50.
You were in the 20s, 50 years ago, and you're still going strong.
Yeah.
Well,
the doctors now tell you that's impossible, you can't get better from MS. I said, well, I did. And then you mustn't have had it, but I said I had a lumbar puncture, everybody treating me with MS.
Yeah, you were in hospital, weren't you?
Yeah.
So, final question I'm going to ask you is, if you had to give advice now to a young female student, what would you say to her?
Just, as my father used to say to me, don't be beat. Because I never was beat. And my father always used to say, the only thing he used to tell us, never be beat. And I thought, that's true, I'll never be beat.
So you're inspiration to us all, Sheila.
Yes, and I just thought I mustn't be beat.
Thank you.
It was a great pleasure.